Hello everyone, welcome back to Let's Solve. In today's session, we'll discuss regarding prevailing winds, which was asked in 2011 by UPSC. Now this topic, like prevailing winds, as the name suggests, is part of climatology, and the question is more specifically regarding the Westerlies. First of all, let's take a look at the previous year question. The Westerlies in southern hemisphere are stronger and persistent than in northern hemisphere. Why? It's a two-statement question and we have to find out the correct answer. Anyway, as always, before going to the answer, let's take a look at the concept, the prevailing winds. Now, before moving on to winds directly, you have to understand that why winds are there, right? Or wind means like it's an horizontal movement of air. Air is moving from one place to another place near the surface, and that we call it as wind. Okay, and this wind is there because of pressure difference. Pressure means like there are, you must have already heard about it, like high pressure and low pressure. High pressure means you have to think like it's having abundant quantity of air particles at that region, and region having low pressure means it's having less amount of air particles in that region. So air will always move from high pressure regions to low pressure regions. Okay, and on earth, like due to various reasons, there are different pressure belts, and these pressure belts exhibit zonal nature. Zonal nature in the sense they are concentrated to certain regions. Certain regions are having high pressure, other regions are having low pressure, right? And that's we call by zonal character or zonal nature. Anyway, importantly, there are 4 pressure belts globally. One equatorial low, which is near to 10 degree north and 10 degree south latitudes. The next pressure belt is subtropical high. It is between 25 degree to 35 degree on both hemispheres, north and south. Okay, and these are the regions where we can find major hot deserts like Sahara or Thar Desert or Mojave Desert or Nabib and Kalahari Desert. All these deserts can be found along this high pressure belt, which is subtropical, which is called as subtropical high pressure belt. Now followed by this, we are again having another low pressure belt, which is called as subpolar low pressure belt. Okay, and this is from around 45 to 60 degrees. We are having the subpolar low pressure belt, and another pressure belt is on top, which is polar high. Anyway, you have to remember that intermediately we are having high pressure and low pressure belt, and wind, as I said earlier, will always move from high pressure to low pressure. Okay, now suppose if you consider this high pressure, which is subtropical high pressure belt, and on both sides, on north side and the southern side of subtropical high pressure belt, we are having 2 low pressure belts, one equatorial low and another one subpolar low pressure belt. So as you already must have guessed, the air will move from the subtropical high to both sides, towards the subpolar low and towards the equatorial low. The winds which are moving towards the equatorial low from subtropical high is called as trade winds. Okay, and the winds which in today's session, which we are going to discuss, the Westerlies, they move from subtropical high towards subpolar low. Okay, so you have to remember that the Westerlies, they are moving from the subtropical high to subpolar low. Okay, and there are another set of winds which move from polar high, which is a high pressure belt, towards the subpolar low, which is a low pressure belt, and that wind we call it as polar easterlies. So on generally, right, we can say that we have 4 pressure belts, and out of the 4 of them we have discussed 3: trade winds, Westerlies and polar easterlies, right? And another one is called as doldrums. It's a very feeble surface wind which is seen near to the equatorial low pressure belt, or within the equatorial low pressure belt we can find this wind, the prevailing wind, doldrum. So there are various types of wind, like prevailing wind, secondary wind. Say monsoon is a secondary wind. The monsoon wind is not a prevailing wind. So you have to remember that the word prevailing means already existing or primary, right? The way you have to understand that term is like, say, the prevailing winds are there only because of the zonal nature of pressure belt. Such winds of global nature or global scale, we call it as prevailing winds. Okay, so anyway, right, this is the intro regarding the pressure belt and the prevailing winds. Now let's move on towards our today's topic of discussion, which is Westerlies. So as I already said, Westerlies, they move from subtropical high pressure belt towards subpolar low pressure belt. Okay, now you have to remember that this is a very important wind, and it's having huge climatic influence on like Western Europe as well as the Gulf of Mexico. These regions, like the movement of ocean water or the climate of Britain, right, and the extratropical cyclone and these kind of things that depended on this wind which is prevailing, which is called as Westerlies. So you have to remember that. So broadly the wind is between 35 degree to 60 degree north and south latitudes, right? The subtropical high pressure belt is between 25 to 35, and from 35 starts the Westerlies. So that means in between we are having the pressure belt, and in between these pressure belts we are having the wind movement. Okay. Now another very peculiar nature of Westerlies is that they are very violent and variable in their direction. Another prevailing wind which we have discussed is trade wind, which moves from subtropical high to equatorial low, and this wind, the trade wind, is seen as a steady wind. It steadily follows in this one particular direction from subtropical high towards equatorial low. Unlike this steady wind, the steady trade winds, the Westerlies, they are very violent and they are very variable in their direction. Now, the Westerlies is also having another property. They show different property in northern hemisphere when compared with the southern hemisphere. So in northern hemisphere, in these latitude 35 to 60 degree latitude, we are having large distribution of land mass, and land mass can create irregularities in pressure belt. So as already we have seen, we are having different pressure belts like subtropical high and subpolar low. So these pressure belts will be showing, especially the subpolar low, will be showing variations, or will be showing irregularities on the surface or on top of the land region. And due to this reason, these pressure belts, they break into different sections in the northern hemisphere due to the presence of land mass. But when we come towards the southern hemisphere, right, at these latitude 35 to 60 degree latitude, we are having minimal amount of continents in the southern hemisphere. So there is little variation in the pressure belt, and the Westerlies, they behave in such a way that they can be seen as constant winds in southern hemisphere, but at the same time the winds in the northern hemisphere, they are very irregular. Okay, so this is one peculiar nature of the Westerlies. In northern hemisphere, they are very variable and violent also. They are very variable, especially they are very variable in their direction. Unlike that, in southern hemisphere, they can be seen as constant winds. Okay, and the reason for this change is, you have to remember that it's because of the irregular distribution of land mass, or more land mass is concentrated towards the northern hemisphere. Now, the Westerlies in the southern hemisphere, due to their consistent nature, due to the persistent nature, they have been given different names in the southern hemisphere, like roaring 40s, furious 50s, and striking 60s. So all the prefix of these terms, roaring, furious, and striking, they all denote the violent nature of that wind, right? And 40s, 50s, 60s represents the latitudes. So the Westerlies in southern hemisphere, which are seen near to 40 degree southern latitudes, is called as roaring 40s, and in the 50 degree southern latitudes, the Westerlies are called as furious 50s, and in 60 degrees it's called as striking 60s. So they all represent the sound of the Westerlies. So anyway, regarding Westerlies, they move from subtropical high towards the subpolar low, and they are having different nature in the northern hemisphere when compared with the southern hemisphere, mainly due to the distribution of land mass. Now let's take a look at the 2011 previous year question that came from this topic. So it's a two statement question. Westerlies in the southern hemisphere are stronger and persistent than in northern hemisphere. Why? So here the first statement, southern hemisphere has less land mass as compared to northern hemisphere, which is actually true, and so answer should be having 1 in it. And the second statement, Coriolis force is higher in southern hemisphere as compared to northern hemisphere. Now in this video we haven't covered the topic the Coriolis force. In brief, let's see what is Coriolis force. Coriolis force is a deflective force, and it is due to the rotation of the earth. So while earth is rotating, the winds moving from one place to another place will be deflected, right? And that deflecting effect is called as Coriolis effect, and it sometimes is seen as a force and called as Coriolis force. And for a more detailed discussion on Coriolis force and Coriolis effect, you can refer to the video in our YouTube channel regarding Coriolis effect. So just search Coriolis force Ekam IAS and you shall get that video, right? So Coriolis force is another very important topic for your UPSC prelims examination. We are having repeated previous year questions from Coriolis force, and hopefully we'll discuss or we'll be solving previous year questions that are related with Coriolis force in some other video. Anyway, the Coriolis force is due to rotation of Earth, and hemisphere wise there is no difference in Coriolis force. Okay, Coriolis force is same in northern hemisphere as it is in the case of southern hemisphere, because it's only dependent on the rotation of the Earth. It's not dependent on revolution, it's not dependent on oceans, it's not dependent on land mass or any other such factors. Coriolis force is only dependent on the rotation of the Earth. So you must be knowing, or you must have guessed, the second statement is wrong, and here answer comes out as one only, or the option A. The Westerlies in southern hemisphere are stronger and persistent than in the northern hemisphere because of less landmass in the southern hemisphere.